On a series that I've entitled Lessons from Elijah. And I tell you, I have shared some things that are just profound, that would change any person's life who would go to the effort to listen to this and to receive instruction. Sadly, there's a lot of people that just are dependent upon themselves. They're determined that they're going to go out and do it their way. They'll learn everything on their own, and those are the people that make so many mistakes. The Scripture says that God gave us all of these accounts so that we could learn through these people how not to make their mistakes. Well, that's tremendous. What a gift God has given us. And I have learned things at Elijah's expense that I haven't had to go through personally. As I said, this is the end of my 4th week of teaching on this, and I spent the first 3 weeks talking about all of the successes that Elijah had, how he called for a drought, how he was miraculously sustained in a place called there, how he multiplied the widow's food, how he raised the widow's son from the dead, how he went back, called the nation together, became basically in control of the whole nation, had a duel between him and the prophets of Baal. He won. He killed all of the prophets of Baal. He prayed. He ended the drought. He outran a chariot that had a head start for 20 miles. And those are all positive things. But in the 19th chapter, after all of these successes, he was intimidated by Jezebel threatening to kill him. And again, I've said this before, but if Jezebel really wanted to kill him, she could have just killed him instead of sending a note saying she was going to kill him. I believe she wanted him dead, but she couldn't just override the public opinion. The entire nation now had turned to God, and I mean, they literally, if she had killed Elijah, the one who had done all of this, the entire nation could have come and overthrown her and Ahab, and I don't believe she could have just killed him. She wanted him dead, but she had to resort to threats and intimidations, and this is very comparable to the devil, that the devil would like to kill all of us, but he can't. He has to go about seeking whom he may devour. And the only people he can devour are the people who get afraid and intimidated and yield to him through fear. And so there's some great lessons to learn from this. So anyway, Elijah ran, God appeared to him, and God asked him a question. What are you doing here, Elijah? And this is in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 9. Elijah was supposed to be back in Samaria. God had used Elijah to cause this great revival, and yet the man who was anointed and so used of God to bring the nation to this place where they were willing to make God their true Lord and serve Him, the man who God used was running in fear, and he was hundreds of miles away. And God said, "What are you doing here?" And I believe that if Elijah would have humbled himself and have repented, things would have been totally different. But instead, he started placing the blame everywhere else. God, it's them. They are prophets. They're persecuting your prophets. They're killing people. I'm the only one left. And I've made a major point out of this because I believe it is a major point. In 1 Kings 18:13, Obadiah had told Elijah that there were still 100 prophets that had been hiding in a cave and that he had been miraculously sustaining with bread and water over this entire drought. And so Elijah knew that he wasn't the only one, but it didn't matter what the truth was. This is what he felt. He either discounted these people and didn't put them in his category, he was so much better than them, or he looked at them as cowards, or maybe they weren't true prophets. I don't know how he rationalized it, but he knew that there was 100 prophets of the Lord that were still faithful to him, and yet he discounted that and he said, I'm the only one. So God let him retake this test. Anytime God has you take the test over, ask you the same question, it's because you gave the wrong answer the first time. You would be better off to come up with a different answer. But Elijah came up with the exact same answer, still blamed other people. God, I'm the only one. I just want to share with you, this is one of the lessons that I've learned, that any time I think I'm the only one that has this revelation, I'm the only one who's serving God. God, I'm the only one. Any time that thought ever comes to me, I immediately think of Elijah, and I call it the Elijah syndrome. And man, any time I go to thinking I'm the only one that's doing anything, I realize this is error. That is not true. Now, there are some things, like I'm going to say some things in the rest of this chapter that I've never heard anybody else teach on, but I know that there's other people that have this. There's nothing new under the sun. And so I'll just emphasize that it's not being said enough. There's not enough people saying it. But I have come to the conclusion that, man, I'm not the only one that God could use. I'm not the only one that has this revelation. I'm not the only one anything. You know, not too long ago, 2 years ago as a matter of fact, I had a situation come up, and there was a person who was a very good friend of mine who's been a tremendous blessing to me, and there's just all kinds of positive things associated with this man, and yet it was time for him to leave the ministry. And I didn't like it. It was distasteful to me, but I mean, I waited probably 2 years to say something after I knew it was time. And so anyway, I was probably wrong. I'm not saying I did all of this right, but I finally came to a place to where I knew that that was God's will, that we needed to separate. And I finally brought myself to say something, but in this process, I was saying, but God, I love this person. God, I don't want to hurt this person. God, this person has helped me here. They've done this. I wouldn't be what I am. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for their help. And I was thinking of all of these things, and in a sense, I was saying, God, I can't make it without this person. And I mean, the Lord very clearly spoke to me, and He said, nobody is indispensable. See, that's the same thing right here. Elijah, I'm the only one. No, you're never the only one. Nobody is indispensable. And then, after the Lord told me about this person, He says, neither are you. He says, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll get somebody else to do it. And all of a sudden, I thought, you know what, I can do this. I decided, it really brings you back down to reality. Put your feet on the ground once you understand that, you know what, nobody's indispensable. And anytime you get to thinking that you are indispensable, you're the only one. You're the only one serving God. You've got this Elijah syndrome going, and I'm guaranteeing you it's not good. How did God respond to this? He was gracious to Elijah. He gave him a couple of chances, but finally, after Elijah responded this way, look at this in 1 Kings chapter 19 and in verse 15. It says, and the Lord said unto him, go return on thy way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when thou comest, anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, and Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Meholah shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. He gave him 3 things to do, and remember that this was the Lord speaking to him in an audible, still small voice. This isn't just an impression he had that maybe he missed God, maybe he understood it. No, this was clear direction, an audible voice from God telling Elijah to do 3 things. And he only did 1 out of the 3, which was go, and it was the last thing. He was commanded to do 3 things: anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, Jehu to be king over Israel, and Elisha to take your place. The only thing he did was the last thing. He went and anointed Elisha to take his place, which to me says that Elijah had he just had it. He was through. He had failed God. He couldn't ever face people again and in the name of the Lord stand there as a prophet and do these things, and he had lost confidence in himself. He was embarrassed. He just wanted out. He wanted to retire. It was over. He went and anointed his replacement, and he did not do the other 2 things that God commanded him to do. So you can see all of this right here. It says in verse 17, it says, and it shall come to pass, him that escapeth the sword of Hazael shall Jehu slay, and him that escapeth from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha slay. Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. So Elijah said, I'm the only one. He knew that there were 100 more, but nonetheless, he was saying he was the only one. God told him there were still 7,000. So there was, he was totally out of place in what he was saying. Likewise, I know this may not really bless you right now, but it's the truth, that anytime you go to thinking you're the only one and stuff, you're always wrong. There's always a remnant. God always has His people. You know, we listen to the news media today, and the news media has been taken over by the ungodly. And they aren't presenting good things. They thrive on controversy. They thrive on negative things. They don't report about all of the planes that land safely. They'll report on the one that crashed. They don't report on all of the people who are living in harmony and the good things that are being done. They'll talk about the people who murdered somebody, who raped somebody, who stole this and stuff. That's just the way that our world is. They gravitate and just constantly feed us this diet of bad information. But the truth is that there's a lot of really good things happening. Here's how I feel in my heart. I don't know that I can prove this to you. I don't have the statistics to prove this, but I really believe that we are living probably in one of the greatest revivals that the world has ever seen. And I know that by me saying that, many of you are just taken back like, no way, look at the way this nation is going. And again, you're looking at all this bad stuff. You know, a few years back, I went to Washington, D.C., and while I was there, I went to this thing that David Barton puts on. He's the one that heads up Wall Builders. And David Barton has joined up with me, and together at Charis Bible College, we are now doing a practical government school. And we're training people how to, practically get involved in government and start making a difference in our government. And so anyway, David and Cheryl Barton have become good friends. But I went to Washington, D.C., and they have a thing where they bring in ministers and they teach you the history of America, and they do a lot of things. They have a tour of the Capitol they go through. And I mean, there are, I don't know for sure, but I'm saying for sure there's dozens, possibly 100 statues in our nation's capital of preachers who were involved in politics, who were politicians, who did all of these things. And they give you all of this godly background, which most of us have been denied, and we've been taught that there's a separation of church and state, which is not true, and it wasn't that way. The people who founded our nation founded it on Christian principles. As a matter of fact, in this practical government school, one of the things that we're going to do is go back to original documents. David Barton has the largest private library in the world of American patriots and their writings outside of, outside of the public stuff. I mean, in private, he's got the largest collection. And he's going to go back, and we're going to take the actual writings from people in the early 1800s who were used to write the Declaration, to write all of the amendments and stuff. And we're going to hear their own comments about why they said this and what they meant. And anyway, it's going to be powerful. But my point is that when I was there and I heard all of this godly background, and then we had, again, I'd have to guess, but I'd say at least 6, maybe 10 sitting senators come and speak to us, and they were, committed Christians, people who were standing up and doing things. What it did, it just really encouraged me and showed me that God is doing so many awesome things, not only in the past, but in the present. Man, God is moving. God's raising up people. There are people that were miraculously called and separated, and they made it into the political realm by supernatural intervention of God. And I heard all of these things, and I went up to David and I said, man, this has really encouraged me. I said, I didn't know this. I said, I just had a really negative impression about everything and everybody in politics. And David made this statement to me, and he said, you've been listening to the 10 Spies Network. And you know what? He didn't explain that, but he didn't have to explain it. That's a harken back to Numbers chapter 13, where Moses sent out the spies. There was 12 spies, and Joshua and Caleb gave a positive report, but the 10 spies, they brought up a negative report saying, oh yeah, it's a great land, but we can't do it. They're giants, we're grasshoppers. And they turned the people's hearts against everything. And sadly, this is the way it's being done. The people that are in the media, the people that control our information that is fed us, are feeding us all of the bad, negative stuff. But I really believe that there is a tremendous revival going on. And again, I don't know that I can prove that to you because I don't have any outlet that is just presenting all of the positive reports and showing us all of these things. I'm not sure that if somebody had some outlet that just put out nothing but positive things and the miracles that are happening and the great things, I'm not sure anybody would listen to it. That's not what sells. Bad news is what sells, not good news. But just based on my limited contact, I travel the world, I travel this nation, I go to different churches, and man, I am hearing awesome reports about miracles that are happening. I just read a report less than an hour ago about 250,000 people that were impacted by this one ministry, and miracles happening, blind eyes being opened, people being saved, lives being changed. I can tell you, just looking at our Charis Bible College is bursting at the seams. We can't seem to build fast enough, to build big enough. People are coming from everywhere. Our missions trips, when we send them out, it is a routine thing to see great miracles. People raised from the dead. We have seen multiple people raised from the dead, not just through me, but through our students. We're teaching people the Word, and people are grabbing hold of the Word. In the entire Bible, there were 8 people recorded raised from the dead, plus Jesus. That makes 9 if you include the resurrection of Jesus. And then it says that there were people that came out of their graves and walked into Jerusalem when Jesus rose from the dead, but it doesn't tell us how many of those there were. So anyway, there's 8 specific times, 9 if you include Jesus, and yet I could name right now probably 40 or 50 people off the top of my head who have been raised from the dead or who have seen people raised from the dead. And if I was to include the Bible college students that are going out, we've got a number of our instructors. We've got people over in Russia and in Atlanta and other places that have seen people raised from the dead. If I was to include that, I bet you it would be well over 50, closer to 100 people, and yet there's only 9 people in all of the Bible. If you stop and think about that, that's about 4,000 recorded years of biblical history, 9 people, and I could name you at least 50, maybe up to 100 people who've been raised from the dead. We've got stories on our website. You can go and see people that were in wheelchairs that are now running. You can see people who were given up to dead. The doctor said they wouldn't return, and they were healed. People with MRIs showing 1/3 of their brain dead and non-functional. They should have been in a vegetative state, and yet they're totally alive and well. Now, since that time, that person has died and gone on to be with the Lord. But for 10 years or whatever, they functioned when they weren't supposed to be able to function. We've got testimonies of people born without a whole heart, only a portion of their heart, no arteries to their lungs, and yet they are alive and well. We've got people from just nearly everything you can imagine. It's happening. God is moving. There's great miracles happening. So anyway, my point is that Elijah is sitting here saying, even I only, I'm the only one left. Not true. It's also not true for you. I believe we are living in a great day. It's just that we are listening to the 10 Spies network. We aren't hearing this. And sad to say, even among Christians often will just amplify the negative things. You'll have people get up and preach a sermon, and they'll start giving statistics about how bad our nation is and all of the things that are wrong, and then they'll end it with, we need to pray and believe God. But the negative impression, or the impression that's left, is all negative. It's just talking about how bad things are. But there's a lot of great things happening. So let me again just point this out, that Elijah, he went and anointed Elisha to take his place, but he did not do 2/3 of the things that God told him to do in an audible voice. You can see that because in 2 Kings chapter 8 is where Elisha anointed Hazael to be king over Syria. He wouldn't have done this if his predecessor Elijah had already done it. And then in chapter 9, Elisha anoints Jehu to be king over Israel. And he wouldn't have done this if Elijah had done it. So Elijah failed in 2/3 of the things that God told him to do. The only thing he did was anoint his successor, and I believe that was indicative of him just wanting out of it. He was ready to quit, ready to give up. And so here it says in verse 19, this is 1 Kings 19:19, it says, so he departed, talking about Elijah, and found Elisha the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th. In other words, this shows you that he was a very rich, very well-to-do man. He had 11 other servants that were plowing with yokes of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. And Elijah just passed by him, and cast his mantle upon him. Which, to us today, this may not mean much, but in that day, they knew exactly what all this was about. And in verse 20, it says, he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me, I pray thee, kiss my father and my mother, then I will follow thee. And Elijah said unto him, go back again, for what have I done to thee? This is a little awkward here. It's hard to know exactly what happened, but to me, this looks like Elijah was saying, hey, I just obeyed God. I'm calling you. Here's this mantle. I've cast this mantle upon you, and this is God's call. I've done what God told me to do. You do whatever you want to. In other words, Elijah, just as he was telling the Lord, he just had given up. He was ready to quit, and he went and he cast his mantle on this successor, but he wasn't going to force the issue. He just basically said, you do whatever you want to. And Elisha went back and he killed the oxen that he was plowing with, used the yoke that they had as fire, and what he did basically was burn his bridges behind him. This was it. He was never going to go back to doing this. And again, I'm reading between the lines, but everybody in the nation of Israel knew what Elijah had done. I believe that Elijah was well known, and Elisha, this is not his first rodeo. This wasn't his first time to ever respond to the Lord. He had been seeking the Lord. It's possible that God had prepared him. It's possible that he was praying and saying, oh God, I want to be like Elijah. I'd like to have you use me. I know that today when people are called into the ministry, it's never totally a broad-sided thing. They've been prepared for it. I believe that Elisha was ready for this, and instead of going back and staying with his family or whatever, he burnt his bridges behind him, and then he ran after Elijah, and he became his servant. And it doesn't say exactly how long it was, but I've read a number of commentaries, and most people believe it was 8 years from the time that Elisha was anointed by Elijah until Elisha became the prophet and took over his ministry. So for 8 years at least, or possibly even longer than that, Elisha was in training. Boy, there's a great lesson here that, if you feel called to the ministry, you don't need to learn everything through your own mistakes. Go get with somebody who's already in the ministry. And just like Elijah was in decline at this time. He wasn't doing everything right, but there were still great things to learn. Sometimes you learn what not to do. We need to, in a sense, apprentice under other people. I'm out of time today, but I do have this teaching in book form, Lessons from Elijah. I also have it in Spanish. We have a study guide, CDs, DVDs, and then we have a package that we're calling our Lessons package, where you can get my teaching on